my own little world. Amazingly, all the times that I should have been caught, I never was.
Chilling, never before heard prison.
Milwaukee police found body parts in a North Side apartment, and now they wonder if they've uncovered some kind of death factory.
Jeffrey Dahmer met his death this morning while working as a janitor.
How could someone live a seemingly ordinary life while secretly committing serious crime? Have you ever looked at someone and thought they seem completely normal? Maybe a neighbor, a classmate, or even someone you pass on the street every day. Now, imagine discovering that the person you thought was ordinary had been hiding a very dark secret for years. Sounds valuable, right? Yet this is exactly why the story I'm about to tell reminds one of the most discussed criminal cases in American histories. Even more than 30 years later, people are still talking about his case through documentaries, books, podcasts, and television series. So, today, I invite you to look beyond the headlines as we explore the life of Jeffrey Dahmer, the event that eventually led to his arrest, and the lasting impact his case had on society. To understand how this story began, we need to go back to Jeffrey Dahmer's childhood. Jeffrey Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, United States. He was the first child of Lionel Dahmer and Joyce Dahmer. His father worked as a chemist, while his mother often struggled with health issues and emotional instability. As a baby, Jeffrey's life appeared to be similar to that of any other child. However, the atmosphere at home was not always peaceful. His parents frequently argued, and his mother suffered from depression and various health problems, making family life increasingly difficult. As a result, Jeffrey grew up in a household filled with tension. When he was young, Jeffrey was known as an active and cheerful child. However, a noticeable change occurred after he underwent double hernia surgery shortly before his 4th birthday. After that, he became quieter and often preferred to be alone. In elementary school, Jeffrey was known as a shy boy who rarely spoke. He also had only few of friends. Some of his teachers later recalled that Jeffrey seemed to receive little attention at home. His father was often busy with work, while his mother was dealing with her own physical and emotional struggle. Their circumstances caused Jeffrey to become even more withdrawn from those around him. As he grew older, Jeffrey began to develop unusual interests. He became fascinated by dead animals and their remains. In 1968, when his family moved to Bath, Ohio, his interest grew even stronger. He often collected large insect bones and small animal skeletons that he found near his home. One day, Jeffrey asked his father how animal bones could be preserved. Leonard saw this as a sign of scientific curiosity and gladly taught his son how to clean and whiten bones using chemicals, so they could be preserved properly. From that moment on, Jeffrey's hobby became more serious. He began collecting various animal bones and studying their structure. Sometimes he would find animal carcasses in the area, examining them to better understand their skeletal anatomy, and then bury them afterward. For Jeffrey, this activity was both fascinating and satisfying. No one could have imagined that the quiet boy who spent much of his time alone collecting bones would one day become one of the most infamous figures in American criminal history. When Jeffrey Dahmer entered regular high school, he began to stand out from most of his classmates. He didn't have many close friends and was often seen as a loner. Despite this, his teacher remembered him as a polite and fairly intelligent student. Behind what appeared to be a normal school life, Dahmer was beginning to face increasingly serious problems. At around the age of 14, he started drinking alcohol. What may have begun as simple experimentation soon became a regular part of his daily life. He sometimes even brought alcohol to school and drank it during class hours. When a classmate once asked why he was drinking in a morning history class, Dahmer simply replied that alcohol was his medicine. Although he was often quiet, Dahmer had another side that surprised many people. At school, he became known for his strange antics and practical jokes. He would imitate animal sounds, pretend to fall down, or act as though he had a physical disability. His unusual behavior often made his classmates laugh. Sometimes he even performed his act in exchange for money, which he would later use to buy alcohol. While his classmates saw him as a school clown, Dahmer was privately struggling with personal issues he never shared with his family. During his teenage years, he realized that he was attracted to other boys. However, he chose to keep this part of himself hidden. He briefly had a relationship with another teenage boy, but it didn't last long. As he grew older, the thoughts and fantasies he kept to himself became increasingly complex and troubling. He often spent long periods alone, lost in his own imagination. Over time, these thoughts became more obsessive and gradually influenced the way he viewed relationships with other people. Meanwhile, the situation at home continued to deteriorate. His parents' marriage was filled with arguments and conflict, creating an unstable environment for years. In September 1977, his father discovered that his mother had been involved with another man. This revelation became a major turning point in their marriage. After years of growing tension and unresolved problems, Leona and Joyce decided to separate. In May 1978, Dahmer successfully completed high school and graduated from River High School. However, his graduation was far from the joyful occasion typically experienced by teenagers his age. Shortly after his graduation, the Dahmer family fell apart. On July 24, 1978, his parents' divorce was officially finalized. His mother left with his younger sibling, while his father stayed with Jeffrey, who was just 18 years old at the time. The summer of 1978 became a turning point in Jeffrey Dahmer's life. On June 18, 1978, Dahmer was driving around his neighborhood when he met a young man named Stephen Hicks, who was almost 19 years old. At the time, Hicks was looking for a ride to a music concert. Dahmer then offered him a ride. During the trip, Dahmer invited Hicks to stop by his house for a few beers and some company. Unaware of the danger, Hicks accepted the invitation. At the house, they spent several hours talking, listening to music, and drinking together. As the day turned into evening, Hicks eventually said that he wanted to continue his journey and leave. For most people, that would have been an ordinary goodbye. For Dahmer, however, it was different. He didn't want Hicks to leave. According to Dahmer's later confession, as he was getting ready to leave, he attacked him twice from behind with a 4.5 kilograms dumbbell while Hicks was sitting in a chair. Hicks immediately lost consciousness, and Dahmer promptly strangled him to death with the barbell. The incident ended with the death of Stephen Hicks, who became the first victim in the case that would later shock the United States. After that, Dahmer dissected his body in his grandmother's basement before burying the remains in a shallow grave in his backyard. Then, a few weeks later, Dahmer dug up the grave and removed the flesh from the bones. He dissolved the flesh in acid before flushing the solution down the toilet. He also crushed the bones with a sledgehammer and stranded them in the woods behind the house. Surprisingly, no investigation immediately pointed toward him. There were no arrests, and no one around him appeared to suspect what had taken place. On November 20, 1987, Jeffrey Dahmer, who was living with his grandmother in West Allis, Wisconsin, met a 25-year-old man named Stephen Tommy at a bar in Milwaukee. After spending some time together, Dahmer convinced Tommy to accompany him to a hotel where he had rented a room for the night. According to Dahmer's later statements, he initially intended to render Tommy unconscious so that he could remain by his side. However, when he woke up the following morning, he found that Tommy had died. Dahmer later claimed that he could not clearly remember what had happened during the night. After realizing that Stephen Tommy had died, Dahmer panicked. Instead of contacting the authorities, he decided to cover up the crime. He moved Tommy's body from the hotel to his grandmother's house in West Allis using a large suitcase. A week later, he dismembered Tommy's body into several parts, including the head, arms, and legs. He then cut them into small pieces. After removing the bones, Dahmer placed the flesh in one plastic bag and the bones in another, then crushed them with a sledgehammer. 2 weeks after Tommy's murder, Dahmer boiled Tommy's head in a mixture of soylent and bleach, so that he could break it down and dispose of it in the trash. The death of Stephen Tommy became a significant turning point in Dahmer's criminal history. Unlike his first known victim nearly a decade earlier, this case was followed by a series of additional crimes. Investigators later viewed Tommy's death as the beginning of a period during which Dahmer's offenses became more frequent and increasingly serious. After Stephen Tommy's death in 1987, Jeffrey Dahmer admitted that he no longer tried to suppress the many dangerous impulses within him. He began actively seeking out victims, most of whom he met in or around gay bars. Dahmer typically lured them to his home with promises of money, friendship, or photo sessions. 2 months after Tommy's murder in January 1988, Dahmer met James Dockstader, who was 14 years old at the time. Dahmer persuaded him to go to his grandmother's house for a photo shoot in exchange for $50. Later, they engaged in sexual activity before Dahmer dragged Dockstader and struck him on the basement floor. A week later, Dahmer dismembered the body in the same manner as he had with Tommy. On the evening of March 24, 1988, Dahmer met a 22-year-old bisexual man named Richard Guerrero outside a gay bar called Phoenix. After talking, Dahmer invited Guerrero to his grandmother's house, offering him $50 to keep him company that night. Once there, Dahmer rendered Guerrero unconscious by dragging him and then stroking him to death before performing oral sex on his corpse. After Guerrero's death, Dahmer proceeded to dismember the body, separating the bones and flesh, which he would dispose of in the trash over the following weeks. In September 1988, Dahmer's life began to change. His grandmother, who had been letting him stay with her, finally asked Dahmer to move out. The decision was not without reason. For some time, Dahmer had been drinking more frequently, bringing young men home late at night, and causing various concern within the family. Additionally, there was a foul odor coming from the basement and garage of the house, which made his grandmother increasingly uncomfortable. Shortly thereafter, Dahmer found a one-bedroom apartment at 808 North 24th Street, Milwaukee, on September 25, 1988. He officially moved into his new home and began living on his own. However, that freedom didn't last long. Just 2 days after his move, Dahmer was arrested in connection with a case involving a 13-year-old boy. The incident brought Dahmer into the legal system for the first time and drew the attention of authorities to his life. To defend his son, Lionel Dahmer hired a lawyer named Gerald Boyle. At the defense team recommendation, Dahmer underwent a series of psychological evaluations before the trial began. The results of the evaluation paint a picture of a man suffering from profound social isolation. Further examination revealed that Dahmer was impulsive, had difficulty trusting others, and felt frustrated with his own life and the various failures he experienced. Additionally, records from his probation officer note that Dahmer had previously been diagnosed with schizoid personality disorder, a condition that was subsequently taken into account during the trial. On January 30, 1989, Dahmer pleaded guilty to the charges against him. The court accepted his plea, but sentencing was not immediately handed down and was scheduled for May. On March 20, 1989, coinciding with Easter holiday, Dahmer took about 10 days off from work. During that time, he decided to move back into his grandmother's house in West Alice. In March 1989, while still awaiting the court's decision on the case against him, Dahmer committed another crime. On March 25th, he met a 24-year-old man named Anthony Sears at a gay bar in Milwaukee. According to Dahmer's later confession, the encounter initially seems like an ordinary conversation between two people who had just met. After spending time together at the bar, Dahmer took Sears to his grandmother's house, where they engaged in oral sex before Dahmer dragged and strangled Sears. The next morning, Dahmer placed Sears' body in his grandmother's bathtub, then began decapitating him before attempting to skin him. He stripped the flesh from his body and crushed his bones, then disposed of them in the trash. However, this case differed from some of his previous ones. Dahmer later admitted that he had a growing obsession with his victim and began keeping some items related to them as mementos. He preserved Sears' head and genital in acetone and stored them in a wooden box which he kept in the locker at his grandmother's house. And when he moved to a new address the following year, he took them with him. On May 23, 1989, the court finally sentenced Dahmer for the cases he had previously been charged with. He received a 5-year probation sentence and 1-year prison sentence. However, he was still granted permission to continue working, so he wouldn't have to leave his job entirely while serving his sentence. In addition, Dahmer was required to register as a sex offender, a legal status that will remain with him even after the case was closed. Although sentenced to 1 year, Dahmer didn't serve his entire sentence. He was released early, about 2 months before his scheduled release date. Upon his release, the 5-year probation period ordered by the court officially began. For a time, Dahmer returned to live at his grandmother's house in West Alice. To many people, his life might have appeared to be returning to normal after his run-in with the law. However, behind the scene, no one realized that a far more extensive series of crime was still unfolding. In June 1990, Dahmer struck again. Eddie Smith, who was 36 years old at the time, became Dahmer's sixth murder victim. A month later, on July 15, 1990, Dahmer struck again. The seventh victim was Ricky Biggs, who was 27 years old at the time. In September, Dahmer killed two victims within a single month. His eighth victim was Ernest Miller, 22 years old, and his ninth victim was David Thomas, 23 years old. 5 months later, in February 1991, Dahmer killed again. A 19-year-old teenager named Curtis Tarder became his 10th victim. In April 1991, Dahmer killed another teenager, his 11th victim, named Aaron Lindsay, who was 19 years old at the time, just like his previous victim. In May 1991, Dahmer killed two victims at once, one adult and one teenager. The 12th victim, 20 Hughes, 31, was killed on May 24th. Then, 3 days later, on May 77, Dahmer killed Connor Sintasamfole, 14 years old, who became his 13th victim. A month later, on June 30th, Dahmer killed his 14th victim, Matt Turner, who was 20 years old at the time. In July, Dahmer killed again, not twice but 3 times in a row. On July 5th, Jeremiah Weinberger, 23, became his 15th victim. Then, on July 12th, Oliver Lacey, 23, became his 16th victim. And the last, on July 19th, Joseph Brotherhood, 25, became his 17th victim. As he had done before, he lured the victims to his residence, drugged them, and then killed them. He would first separate the victim bodies, separating the bones from the flesh, and then dispose of them in the trash. Dahmer faced a series of charges for the murders he had committed over the years. Initially, he was charged with 17 counts of murder, though that number was later reduced to 15 during the trial. Dahmer's trial began on January 13, 1992, and immediately garnered significant media attention across the United States. The evidence uncovered by investigators was extensive and overwhelming, leaving little doubt regarding his involvement in these crimes. His defense team didn't attempt to deny that Dahmer was the perpetrator of the murder. Instead, they argued that Dahmer could be not held fully responsible for his action due to his mental condition. Therefore, Dahmer pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. For approximately 2 weeks, the jury heard testimony from witnesses, psychologists, psychiatrists, and various pieces of evidence presented in court. Ultimately, the jury concluded that Dahmer understood his action and knew that what he was doing was wrong. Consequently, the court ruled that Dahmer was legally sane and found him guilty of 15 counts of murder. As punishment, he was sentenced to 15 consecutive life sentences, for a total of 957 years. This sentence represents the maximum penalty that can be imposed in the state of Wisconsin, as the death penalty has been abolished there since 1853. In one of the hearings following the verdict, Dahmer expressed remorse for all the crimes he had committed. He acknowledged that his actions had caused immense suffering to many people and even stated that he would not object to facing his own death. Several months later, specifically in May 1992, Dahmer was transferred to Ohio to face legal proceedings regarding his first victim, Seven Hicks. During that trial, he again admitted to his crimes and pleaded guilty to the murder he had committed in 1978. After being sentenced to 15 life terms in 1992, Jeffrey Dahmer was sent to Columbia Correctional Institution, a maximum security prison in Wisconsin. At the start of his sentence, prison officials placed him under strict supervision. Jeffrey Dahmer's name was already known throughout the United States, so officials feared his safety might be threatened by other inmates. For some time, he spent most of his days separate from the other inmates. Inside prison, Dahmer's life was vastly different from when he was free. He spent his time reading, studying, participating in religious activities, talking with staff and some other inmates, and performing cleaning duties such as cleaning the restroom and the gym area. In various interviews, Dahmer expressed regret for his action and exacted that he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. During his incarceration, Dahmer also began showing a greater interest in religion. He attended religious classes and was later baptized. Some people believe he genuinely regrets his action, while others doubt the sincerity of his transformation. Nevertheless, his status as one of America's most notorious serial killers keeps him a controversial figure. Many inmates know who he is, and not all of them can accept the crimes he has committed. On the morning of November 28, 1994, Dahmer was performing his work duties in the prison area, alongside two other inmates. At the time, they were assigned to clean the gym's restroom. For the first time in a long while, they were not under the direct supervision of a guard for several minutes. A short time later, guards found Dahmer severely injured after being attacked by another inmate named Christopher Carver. He attacked Dahmer using a piece of metal for gym equipment. Another inmate at the scene, named J.C. Anderson, was also a victim of the same attack. Christopher Carver confessed to authorities that he committed the act because he was disgusted by Dahmer's past heinous acts against his victim, coupled with a voice he believed was from God. Dahmer was immediately rushed to the nearest hospital. However, due to his injuries, he died at the age of 34. More than 3 decades have passed since Jeffrey Dahmer's arrest, yet his case continues to be studied, discussed, and debated around the world. The story didn't end when the trial was over. In many ways, the questions raised by the case are still relevant today. Over the years, the Dahmer case has influenced discussions about criminal investigation, community awareness, mental health, and the responsibility of law enforcement agencies. It also encouraged people to think more carefully about how authorities respond to reports and concerns raised by the public. Because of its complexity, the case has been examined by researchers, psychologists, sociologists, and legal experts. Universities have used it as a case study to better understand human behavior, social system, and the challenges faced by the justice system. Documentaries, books, and television series have introduced the story to new generations, ensuring that it remains part of public discussions. However, many scholars believe that the most important lesson is not about Jeffrey Dahmer himself. Instead, it is about understanding the circumstances, decisions, and systems that allow warning signs to go unnoticed for so long. The case reminds us that public safety often depends on communication, awareness, and the willingness of people and institutions to take concerns seriously. Most importantly, it reminds us that behind every headline, every investigation, and every court case, there are real people whose lives were permanently changed. And while history remembers the name of the criminal, we should never forget the victims and the families who carried the consequences of these events for the rest of their lives. To conclude, the story of Jeffrey Dahmer remains one of the most widely discussed criminal cases in American history. More than 30 years after these events took place, people continue to study and analyze the case from psychological, social, and legal perspective. Most importantly, this story encourages us to remember the victims and families whose lives were permanently affected, and to recognize the human impact behind every historical case. I hope this story has provided not only information about a significant historical case, but also an opportunity to reflect on the lessons that can still be learned from it today. Perhaps the most important lesson from this case is that history is not only about understanding what happened, but also about learning how similar tragedies might be prevented in the future. Thank you for listening. Have a good day, everyone, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye!